sharp crack of a gunshot shattered the still air, but it wasn't the sound that made everyone stop. It was the shock on their faces when the woman they thought was just observing took the shot. A shot that had stood unbeaten for 10 years. The world went silent. They never saw it coming. The room, once filled with hushed whispers and calculated movements, now hung heavy with disbelief. Eyes wide, mouths agape, and hearts suspended in time as the familiar crack of a rifle echoed through the air. Everyone had assumed she was just a spectator until she wasn't. She stood there, her stance steady, her focus unwavering. A woman among men, none of whom expected what happened next. The elite Navy SEALs had trained for this moment, their lives dedicated to precision, to being the best. And yet, there she was, an outsider, without so much as a badge to her name, ready to shatter a record that had stood for a decade. No one expected her to take the shot. No one except her. Her name was Evelyn, but to most she was just the woman who observed. In a world built on steel and grit, she was a shadow among giants, a silent figure who had always preferred the back seat. But that silence was her strength, the quiet before the storm. She hadn't always been a part of the SEALs' training routines. She had been a nurse, a job that required quiet observation in its own right. It wasn't the gunfire or the battlefield that called her. It was the healing, the saving. The sharp, sterile scent of the operating room, the weight of a heartbeat in her hands, those were the moments that defined her. But fate, as it often does, had other plans. It had been her brother, Michael, who first introduced her to the SEALs. A lifelong soldier, Michael had never once flinched at the dangers of war. But when an IED exploded during his final mission, when he was caught in the line of duty, everything changed. She was the one who had held his hand, the one who whispered to him in the sterile silence of the hospital room. She was the one who could never forget how it felt to lose him. He had been more than family. He had been a protector, a soldier she could never hope to be. But there, in the dim light of that sterile hospital room, she had made a vow. She would learn to fight in her own way. Not with guns or bombs, but with knowledge, with strategy. She would honor his memory, not through words or medals, but through the quiet strength he had always shown. It was this quiet strength that led her to the Navy SEALs. She had started as an observer, always at the back of the room, always in the shadows. But there was something about the intensity of their training that spoke to her. The precision, the patience, the ability to hold one's ground no matter what. But none of the men ever thought she could be more than just a witness. They treated her with polite indifference, a nod here, a glance there. She had never spoken of her past, of her sacrifices, of the loss that had shaped her. The SEALs saw her as a woman in a man's world, a spectator, nothing more. Their pride, their rituals, their untouchable records, she was far removed from all of it. Yet, as the months went on, Evelyn absorbed it all. She studied their every move, analyzed their strategies. Her mind, sharp as a razor, began to pick up on what others overlooked. She learned not just how to heal, but how to think like a warrior. And then, one day, it happened. The shot, the record she had been watching from a distance, once again a passive observer, until one small request changed everything. "Can I take a shot?" The words, so simple, so quiet. The room fell still, every eye turned to her. No one expected her to ask. The SEALs had been going through their standard training drill, the one they all believed was impossible to break. A challenge that had stood unbroken for 10 years. They had seen hundreds of men try, fail, and walk away defeated. But when Evelyn asked, something shifted. The leader of the group, a grizzled veteran named Marcus, shook his head. "This isn't for you," he muttered, already turning back to the others. "It's for men who know how to fight." But Evelyn, unshaken, didn't back down. She remained still, watching, listening to the whisper of the wind, the pulse in her veins. This wasn't about proving herself to them. This was about honoring the one person who would never get to make a shot again. Her brother. The tension built slowly, like a storm gathering on the horizon. Evelyn knew she had to prove herself, but not to them. She was not there for validation or approval. She wasn't even there for the record. She was there for something more, something deeper. The others watched her with a mix of disbelief and contempt. Some of them chuckled softly, dismissing her as a passing phase. Others, more silently, couldn't help but wonder, what if? What if this woman, this silent observer, could do what no one else had? Marcus, still skeptical, took his place behind the rifle, preparing for another round. But Evelyn was undeterred. She stepped forward, slow and deliberate, her steps quiet against the hard ground. She adjusted the scope, her fingers steady on the trigger. The world around her faded. There was no room for doubt, no room for fear. Just the rifle, the target, and the echo of her brother's voice urging her on. She steadied her breath, the wind whispering through the trees like a secret only she could understand. Her eyes narrowed, not at the target in front of her, but at the 10 years of history of men who had tried and failed. Her fingers caressed the trigger, and in that moment, everything aligned. She pulled it. The shot rang out. It was a clean hit, a perfect bullseye. The room fell silent, save for the gasp of every man present. At first, no one moved. They stared, wide-eyed, unsure of what had just happened. They had seen the impossible before, but never from someone like her. Marcus stepped forward, his face unreadable. But Evelyn stood still, her gaze never leaving the target. The shot had spoken louder than any words ever could. It wasn't about breaking records. It was about breaking expectations. For the first time, the room shifted. The veterans, the elite warriors who had once treated her as nothing more than an observer, now saw her in a different light. It wasn't just that she had broken the record. It was the way she had done it. Calm, calculated, and with a dignity that none could deny. As the reality of the moment sank in, the men gathered around her. There was no celebration, no loud cheers, just a quiet acknowledgement. Respect. Marcus, his eyes softer now, extended his hand. That was something, he muttered. Evelyn nodded, her silence speaking volumes. She had done what no one thought possible. She had proven that strength wasn't about loud declarations. It was about quiet determination. In the end, it wasn't the shot that mattered. It was the silent strength that had made it possible. Evelyn's journey had never been about proving anyone wrong. It had always been about proving something to herself. The quiet dignity of a woman who had lost so much, but never stopped fighting. And so she stood there, not as a woman among men, but as a force in her own right. Sometimes the greatest victories are not those that are loudly proclaimed, but those that are quietly earned. Where are you watching from? Share your thoughts on Evelyn's story. And if you believe in the power of silent strength, don't forget to subscribe for more stories that honor true heroes.